All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary based podcast. Today, we have a little bit of both, a little bit of commentary, a little bit of an interview here. On the line with me is Nicole. Nicole, so glad you are here. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
Nicole is a commentator, I would guess. She is on TikTok. She is building a community of people on TikTok. And if you're not familiar with TikTok, we don't need to go into a lot about it. I know a lot of people, oh, well, that's all those silly dancing videos. And yeah, that's a part of it. But there's a lot of people on there who are doing all kinds of stuff, all different kinds of ages, and a lot of different interests. And Nicole, her byline in her account is putting God first, defending traditional values and our kids' future. New posts every day. And you can find her on TikTok at Nicole underscore Nathern underscore Hedrick. And really, really good stuff, really well thought out stuff, very compelling stuff. So, Nicole, let's start out with a little bit about you. Where are you from?
So I am originally from Arizona. I'm from Cave Creek specifically. If you don't know where that is, it's right between Phoenix and Flagstaff.
Oh, okay. Phoenix and Flex. I've actually driven that distance. I was in Arizona a long time ago. I went to Meteor Crater. I don't know if you went there. And of course, the Grand Canyon and Lowell's Observatory, which is in Flagstaff. Been there. And that's where a lot of this UFO craziness started, which is a whole nother subject. But Lowell was quite the character, as well as being a scientist and an author. So yeah, I know exactly where you're from. Now, have you always been aware of what's happening in the news, or is that something that evolved more recently?
No, I'm like a lot of people. I didn't really start getting interested in politics until I would say right around 2019, 2020.
Okay. Now you've been in it's the Army, correct? You've done your time in the service.
Yes,
Okay, and did that have an impact on your views?
it did. It had a big impact just because my motivation to join the army was, partly to serve my country, but also because I was very interested in growing as a person. And for me, it was very much maturing experience to
Yeah.
be on your own and actually be responsible for everything in a way that most people aren't until their 30s these days. And for me, that was a very it was a great experience, you
Yeah,
know.
I'm sure it was. You mentioned that when we were in our pre-production talk, that you didn't always think of yourself necessarily as a conservative. And you know what? My opinion on that is, and I don't know your case specifically, but in general, I hear a lot of people say that. And I know it applies to me because I've always kind of considered myself, I would say, an independent. And I mean, a moderate still puts you on the scale, and I hate that. You know, a right or left, or somewhat right or somewhat left. I always kind of independent. Each issue I examine, differently. I don't apply the same filter to everything. But the reason I think a lot of people consider themselves conservative right now is because over the last 5 years in particular, you could make the argument 10 or 15, the left has just gone right out the window. I mean, just left so far left, they can't turn right at all. Um, is that kind of Bill Maher? Bill Maher says that I've always been where I'm at, but the left just went crazy, and now I look like I'm leaning right.
Yeah.
Is that kind of your position?
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like I was very much the typical college student. When I was younger, I was very much hippy dippy all the way. And, at some point, I just looked around and I didn't recognize anything about the Democrat Party anymore. Like, and that's probably been said a million times by now, because at some point it was just, it's unrecognizable. Like I don't know this party
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. Well, you point out some good things in your commentary, and some of the things we've been harping on here at the podcast, but you kind of put a different way of presenting them. So I'm going to ask you about a few of them. And one of the things that we talk about here is the change of language and the little manipulation tactics. We talk about that a lot. I noticed a video where you said your caption on the video is that revolutions don't always start with a bang. They start with a quiet dismantling of social trust, the rewriting of history, and the control of your livelihood. And, that can mean getting canceled for saying something that, you're not supposed to say. That's an interesting concept there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the way our communities and the way that our institutions have evolved in a very short amount of time, like they've become so polarized. It's just, it's incredible, and it's happened just within such a short amount of time. And all of it seems to start back with the pandemic, with this one version of reality being expected to be totally accepted. Um, and to see how that's really spiraled into what we're seeing today is just nightmare fuel. Like for me, it's like I remember being in the army and looking around and one day just seeing like I don't know what's happening. It's like everything is falling apart. Like I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, I saw it even within the army. You saw institutions being broken down. So when you're in the army, you have agencies that are supposed to assist with investigations. These investigative agencies are supposed to be there to kind of, serve as the enforcement. Um, and that just wasn't there. And I remember watching soldiers struggle with issues while other issues were being championed. Um, and when regular everyday soldiers needed their issues handled, there was nothing happening. And I can't explain how it felt to see this happening, and in the meantime being forced to do this this mandate thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what I think it ultimately ends up being is communism. And I had this conversation with another soldier while I was in. I was looking around. I was like, that the military runs on communism, right? And
Yeah.
they like looked at me like I was kind of crazy. And I was like, that that's what it is on a very small scale.
Mm. How do you mean that? Because I've made the argument in the United States anyway. Like I'm all for military spending, 100%. I think that we've got to have a strong military, but I want it spent in the right way. And a lot of these projects are pushed through based upon what certain constituents in certain areas are wanting for their own economic benefit. That's how tanks get made, for example, that the Pentagon doesn't even want. I don't understand during the Iraq War how it was possible that soldiers did not have enough bullets or did not have enough armor when they're spending billions of dollars on this stuff on defense. Right now, from what I understand, the Pentagon has admitted that the Chinese have these hypersonic missiles that we cannot stop. They admitted it. Now, how is it possible that we have these $1 trillion budgets over a period of years for military spending, and these things happen? And when what I hear when you say that is I think about these are work programs essentially on a huge scale. To build these, they are government work programs, and they don't necessarily help the soldier on the ground, who is the person I care about the most. So, am I right or am I totally wrong about this?
No, you're dead on, because we saw a specific case of what you're talking about just a couple years ago when soldiers were showing up to dining facilities and there was no food. And the reason that was happening is because money was being taken, like, if in case you don't know, your food is paid for by money being taken out of each and every one of your paychecks. So that money is gone. And this money is supposed to be put towards these dining facilities to help cover the food. And these soldiers were going to these dining facilities and there's no food there. And it's because all of this money is being redirected towards other places. And it's a great, everybody's wondering where, especially like you talked about, we're not we're not seeing anything happening with our capabilities. It's not going to the soldiers. So where's it going?
Yes, that's a good question, and that is when uh, both sides are guilty of a certain amount of. They all have their little tools of straw man arguments. Okay, and one of the things that conservatives will do is anytime somebody like me points out that some of that money isn't going to the right places with some of this defense spending. Oh, you're anti-American. You want a weak military. They launch right into that thing, and that has nothing to do with what we're saying. We just want it to go to the right place. And right now, the two tools of the trade. I'll tell you what the two tools of the trade are. If you are on the left and somebody says something you don't like, you're a racist. Okay. And if you're on the right and somebody says something you don't like, you're a pedophile. that's the that's that's the attacking points. Is there room for objective analysis? And I know we always blame the politicians. We always, the politicians are the ones that create these things and create these issues so that they get everybody riled up. But the fact of the matter is that is what people respond to. I don't know that people in today's society, and I think it's a very dangerous thing, and I can talk about this more later, they don't respond to detailed information. They respond to triggers that they already believe. They're looking for somebody to reinforce what they already believe. They don't want to spend the time researching something. So, is there room for objectivity in today's society? Can you have a successful campaign?
There is, there is, and I believe that, but I think you have to be very, very careful about how you present your information, because I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's the way information is presented to people that seems to get the reaction. And I think that's why so many people are responding to my content, because I go to a lot of trouble to make sure that what I'm saying is presented in a completely neutral frame as far as emotions, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not trying to get an emotional response from people. I'm trying to get them to think. And I think, like you said, we see it happening on both sides. Both parties are guilty of using these very emotionally manipulative tactics. And I think it's really kind of done a lot of damage. It's done a lot of damage to people psychologically, because they don't know how to maintain attention anymore. They can't.
Exactly.
They're too busy looking for their next hit, and it really is great at keeping people incapacitated, just like any other drug.
Yeah. One of the things you talked about is the loaded language now. One of them being trust the science. How aware are people? Are they becoming more aware that they are being with? And another thing that gets me that the left always say, well, terminology, vocabulary is fluid; it changes over time. Okay, maybe in Shakespearean times, English words had one meaning versus another. I don't remember a time when they changed from year to year. Okay. You want to talk about that a little bit, because you covered that very well in the videos that I saw.
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of people remember reading 1984, and at least I hope they do. I hope they remember a time reading the book. But I think the way that language is changing is just so unnatural. The way that it's happening and the way that it's evolving, it's like you can't sit there and say that this is just culture evolving. It seems like it's much more it's the opposite of organic. It's just being intentionally manipulated by something. I'm not going to go as far as to claim that I know where all this is coming from, but I have my own ideas about what's happening in the country. And I think language is being used not only to make things more complicated on a legal basis, because I mean, just changing the definition of what racism is has such insane
Yes.
impacts on how we deal with these types of issues. But it's also about being able to change how people even rationalize with themselves and with others. Like if you can't properly communicate, it's and they do this on purpose. They do it to make sure that there's two different languages being spoken, so neither party is fully understanding each other. And I think it's very intentional.
Sure. That's interesting. That's good stuff. When you talk about the architecture of thought reform, you've done a little bit about that. Tell our audience a little bit about what the architecture of thought reform is and how that's being used.
So to start, I want to make it very clear. I am more of a hobbyist, okay? But I would like to think that I did base this in some type of scientific process, right? So I was in school for my doctoral degree. I did try to be, formal about this process. So I always started with an observation. And what that ultimately led me to was thought reform and brainwashing. And so I started by just trying to figure out what I was seeing with my own two eyes, with the behavior and everything that I was noticing within culture. And it ultimately led to this thought reform. And there were 4 different tactics that I noticed that were being used explicitly that I could see with my own eyes, and that was isolation, control of perception, love bombing and fear, and loaded language. And all of these things were also being used in major revolutions around the world to bring about dramatic changes in government.
One of the things that I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I'm older than you are. I remember back in the late 70s, 80s, when I was in grade school and high school, it was rare that you ran across someone who thought the earth was flat. As a matter of fact, I always used to say as a joke, arguing with you is like trying to argue with somebody who thinks the world's flat. If you don't believe it by now, nothing I am going to say is going to change your mind. But now there are, I don't know exactly what the numbers would be, but if you spend any amount of time on social media, the amount of people who question and they're proud of the fact that they question it is extraordinary. There are people who saying the moon landing was fake. Even the most recent Artemis mission was faked. Space is a lie. There's some kind of firmament up there. We don't. A woman is too hard of a thing to define. I could go on here. These are things that I never imagined would have to be discussed. Is there a celebration of ignorance out there these days?
I think celebration is putting it like mildly. Ignorance seems to just be part of life, doesn't it? Like it's not really being celebrated. It's just every day. Like you're walking down the street and it's nothing new anymore.
Yeah. I want to be clear when it comes to gender. I think most Americans, if I can be so bold, I've been around a lot of people in my time. Most people are live and live when it comes to people's personal lives. I really don't think most people are really that interested in what you're doing in terms of your sexual leanings. However, it has become a thing now where people wear that as a badge just like so many other things in our society. There's a badge for that now. And I think what happens with a lot of these things, like I, for example, am very much a friend of, the LGBTQ community. I think I got a lot of friends who are part of it. And they tell me privately that the fringes of this movement, the people who want to get somebody fired because they won't say that men can get pregnant, those people are doing, the vast majority of that group, a lot of harm, because all these people want is, and I totally agree, I don't think anybody should be discriminated against. I don't want to see kids in school getting glue board on their hair. I don't want to see anything happening to anybody because they're different. And I think most Americans are on board with that. And a lot of these movements start out very innocuously. The Me Too movement did, BLM did. They all start out with things that we can all understand, but as they grow, they take on limbs. They take on more and more things. And before you know it, you have a movement now that's bullying people. I know you've talked about how that was discussed in the military. I don't know if you want to go into that. What has been your experience managing that when people start talking about gender identity now?
Well, it's such a hard topic or to even bring up these days, just because there is so many strong emotions around it. It's just, and they really do kind of force you into a position where it's like, if you don't validate me, then you're hurting me. And for me, that doesn't sit right with me. It never has. Like, I can appreciate wanting to be kind to people, and like you said, wanting to be respectful of other people's life decisions. But when you start putting people in a position where they're responsible for managing your emotions and your psychological well-being, I I personally think that doctors are setting these people up to fail. And if you've been through any type of counseling ever, you know that the last thing you want is for people to be dependent on external forces for validation, because that's unreasonable. That's an unreasonable expectation to have for life.
Yes.
You're always going to be disappointed at some point.
That's an excellent point. The other thing I'll ask you about here is fascism, because boy, we hear that a lot. You're a fascist. You're a fascist this, fascist that. First of all, do people really know what that term means? Do you want to talk about that a little bit first? What is plastic fascism?
So fascism is, you can think of fascism in layers. Like, at its core, fascism is about total control. Fascism is about wanting to completely dominate people against their will. Like, we're talking about, that's venturing into authoritarianism and totalitarianism. But when you actually get into the structural mechanics of it, it's basically the institutions being controlled by a single ideology and a single way of doing things. And in the case of what we're seeing in the US, I personally think we're seeing it play out, like, where these, and it's funny because they constantly point the finger back at us, and it's like, all you have to do is look at any institution and see that there's only one ideology dominating that institution, but they're going to say we're the fascists, right? But they don't want to share. There's no room for anything else but them. And anytime we try to, present some balanced perspective at all, we see this major pushback, and they start yelling fascist, and it's all just one big control game at this point.
You talked about the amygdala hijack, which I don't know if I've heard that term before, but I really like it. It might be a common term, but I don't know everything for sure. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because it really is a way of, if I'm describing this, to trigger you and to get you to change your thought process.
Yes, and this goes into neuroscience, and I've been out of school for a little bit, so I'm a little rusty, but there is definitely a a huge, if you can imagine, like our brains are wired to respond to our environment, and um, whether we like it or not, our bodies are going to react, and we can get addicted to those reactions. So if we have a really strong reaction to something, it can become addictive. People can become addicted to bad emotions like stress. People don't know how to function if they're not stressed. And that's basically what we're seeing, is how these people have become so intoxicated by being angry, right? And unfortunately, when you're in that state of anger, you really kind of stop being able to think critically, right? So you not only are you addicted to these, you know, you're addicted to the state of anger, you're addicted to the anxiety, and so you're not thinking, and you just go round and around and around. You're not, there's no end. You can't think critically enough to actually find a solution. So
Yeah.
you're stuck in that cycle.
When you get triggered by this, one of the things that I think you said was, don't take the bait. You got to stay calm. Is that always easy to do? How do you tell yourself, I got to stay calm? If you just,
No, absolutely not. It's not easy. In fact, like, I still personally struggle with it a lot. And I'm learning right along with everybody when I'm making these videos a lot of the time, because for me, this has very much been as much of a learning process, as it is for everybody else. And I will say that something that is helpful is to journal or write. Like,
okay.
making these videos has been helpful because it kind of helps to organize your thoughts. It helps you to really think things through. And then being prepared with an answer. Like, if you can actually just know your answer, you're not stressed when it's time to have these conversations with people.
Mhm. Interesting. Now, you always said about validating the emotion, not the argument, when you're dealing with somebody like that. It's okay to acknowledge how they're feeling, but you don't necessarily chase their logic. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yes.
Okay. And then you said force logic back into the room by controlling yourself and presenting it. Those are all great things, and these are the kinds of things that she talks about on her TikTok videos. Let's cover just one more thing real quick, and that is the changing of history. How history has been, everything now, according to the left, has been,
I'm excited for this one.
I don't care what you bring up in the past, no matter how good you want to say something about the United States in particular, but Western culture in general. Somebody is going to come up, oh, no, that guy was a real SOB. He was a racist. He was a fascist. He was this or that and the other thing, and goes right on down the line. You can't, it's impossible to say anything good about the history of this country. How did that happen? And you know what? It's happening. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I think colleges are really going to have to start re-examining this, because I think a lot of parents and a lot of young folks are waking up to the fact that there's a certain indoctrination going on, and these enormously expensive degrees aren't going to help you as much as they did in the past. So you better start giving these young folks some practical abilities, besides, saying that Thomas Jefferson was a pig. What say you about this? Is there an indoctrination? I think there is. And quite frankly, I think it comes a lot of times from these professors who have never really worked a day in their life. They had their parents pay for their education. They might have worked in a coffee shop or something, but they did nothing but go to school. And they got these jobs working in these universities and in education and academia their whole life. They've never run a business. They've never been in a street fight. They've never had to handle anything. And from some idealistic platform, they're teaching kids. I think that's how it's happened. And I think the idea that these tenured professors can't be fired is another problem. But go ahead. What say your opinion? What is your opinion? What say you about some of the things that's happening now with how a lot of the mainstream now just simply cannot say anything good about the United States.
Yes, and first I want to talk about, like, when I was a kid, one of the things that we were repeatedly told in our history class is you never look back on history with your own morals and values.
Yeah.
And I don't fully understand when that changed, but that was always taught in my history classes anyways. And you're taught to do that because if you keep looking back at all these different things that happened throughout history, you're always going to find a reason to be mad. And on top of it, we see this really strange shift happening where we're completely forgetting about the impact that the American government had on the rest of the world. There had never been a government like ours before we came into being. And we changed the course of history for everybody in the best way possible. And people want to forget that. And I understand that our past is complicated, but whose past isn't, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And especially when you start getting into how history is being framed by people in authority positions like these professors, you
Mhm.
know, and I can personally attest to how one-sided things have become in these places. Like I've seen it with my own eyes, and I see how bad it is and how people are not being challenged to think critically about any of this at all. They just accept this
Yeah.
premise as fact, and we just see it snowballing. The country is imploding because people have been convinced that there's nothing worth saving about America, and
Yeah.
it's terrible.
It is. Well, I had a kind of a unique childhood. My dad was a Civil War expert. He just loved it. He wrote a book. He actually did a documentary film about the Battle of Gettysburg. I was real young, but I remember it being done. And he was a World War II veteran. And people look at me and say, "How old are you?" Well, say my dad had me when he was very old to be a parent. So I think my dad was 50 something when I was born, and he was a World War II veteran. And his brother got killed in combat. And he gave me some perspectives that I think a lot of times the average person doesn't have. My dad kind of reminds me, you have this very, when you're talking on your videos, you have this very matter of fact, clear opinion and a way of presenting yourself that you're very sure, you're very positive. And my dad had that. My dad had that about the experiences and the things that he went through. I think it's something that a lot of people in the military have. And like, for example, recently I got into a discussion about how terrible the United States was because they dropped the atomic bomb. And I'll just kind of throw this out there as an example. This is something that you don't get told every day. Roughly, most historians say around 60 million people, both military and civilians, were killed during World War II. The vast majority of those deaths were caused by two countries. One was Germany, and the other one was Japan. The vast majority of deaths by Germany were Russian, and the vast majority of deaths by Japan were Chinese. Okay? When we talk about dropping the bomb in Japan in modern times, we think about Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off. We dropped the bomb on Mr. Miyagi. The Empire of Japan was not that. And you can look up the rape of Nanking and some other things to get a pretty good idea of what this was like. We're talking the Bataan Death March. We're talking about some pretty bad stuff. Okay. So these two countries wiped out millions upon millions upon millions of people. As bad as a nuclear explosion is, and I've never understood when you kill 100,000 people instantly, that's immoral. But if you do it over a course of like a month-long invasion, that's okay. I guess the idea is the bomb takes all the fun out of it. I'm being coy there, but you get my point. 100,000 people. And that scared them into surrendering. And actually, not all of them wanted to surrender. There were a lot of people in Japan that were ready to fight to the death. But they ultimately surrendered. Japan got off easy compared to Germany. Germany was completely obliterated, even though we didn't use nukes on them. And the Red Army was hell on women Germans. Absolutely hell. They raped them and everything else. Okay. Germany was actually until the 1990s getting back on its feet. Japan rebounded almost instantly. By the 1950s, 1960s, they were an economic superpower. Okay. And when people say, what makes America great? The idea that we could conquer a country, that we could win in a war and allow them to become an economic superpower is what makes us great. Because if the Nazis had won that war and there was a swastika flagging above your state capitol right now, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't be caring a lot about some of the causes that are out there these days. Those things wouldn't exist. Okay. But the idea that we allowed those countries to flourish with some control naturally is, I think, what makes America great. And I never really hear people talk about that. They always almost want to apologize for how World War II ended. It's getting to the point now where the United States saving the world, which is what we did, has become a thing we have to defend. It has become something ugly. Do you have any comment on that?
I mean, I've never thought about that specific I've never thought about that specifically, but I mean, it does seem like we are caught in this never-ending cycle of just apologizing, and it's getting old. I know for me, it's getting old. It's like you can't keep using this ploy because it's just not. It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It's exhausting.
Yeah. It is. I'm going to go ahead and let people know. Let me make sure I get this right here. You are on TikTok, and it is at Nicole _Nathern _Hedrick. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And right now, is that like your main social media home?
So Facebook right now, I would consider home base. So if they're going to come find me on Facebook, it's under the same name. And it'll be the same profile picture and everything. So it'll be easy enough to find.
Okay. And of course, we will have a link in our show notes. Do you have, we're coming up on the midterms now. That's where all the buzz is. I know that you've expressed concerns about the integrity of our elections. And right now, there's a lot of stuff we haven't touched on. Let me ask you this. I gotta ask you this. With what's going on in Iran right now, as someone who's served in the military, what is your analysis of this? Is this something we should have done?
I hate to say it, but yes. That's how I personally feel. I personally think that this was just been such a long time coming. And I'm just not sure anybody can reasonably argue otherwise. Like, I haven't heard anybody be able to fully justify not taking action at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if the nukes aside, there was no question. Even the critics of this war agree they were getting so many missiles that they could have overwhelmed the Iron Dome. And it appears that they have enough missiles now. Recent reports, missiles aside, getting back to the nukes, that they have enough enriched uranium now that they could make several warheads. And I'm old enough to remember, here again, getting back to my age, I remember the hostage crisis, and I never understood why we just stood back and did nothing. I never understood that. I just absolutely never understood that. We've had state-sponsored terrorism from them for the last 40 years. We've had death to America, death to Israel. They want Israel to fall into the sea and all this other kind of stuff. My only criticism of what has happened is this. Here again, getting back to my dad, he always said, do three things when you go in. He said, have a clear objective. A lot of times that means deciding who lives and who dies. These guys are the bad guys. They got to go. Okay. You go in with an overwhelming force. And number three, and this is the one we have a hard time with the most, is that you get out. Get out. Okay. And the thing that bothers me about this is, okay, the strait's open. It's closed. It's open. It's closed. It's open. It's closed. And these ceasefires, I don't like ceasefires here. Again, as a fan of World War II, Patton always said, I don't want to get any messages telling me to hold my position. That was his famous quote. Because when you start holding your position, that is when bad things happen with the enemy. And ceasefires were used during Vietnam as a tool. The Viet Cong and the government over there knew that if they asked for a ceasefire and they didn't get it, that the college campuses over here would erupt. But the fact of the matter is ceasefires sound like a good thing. It's a peaceful thing. But what it is an opportunity for your enemy to reload, to refortify their positions and everything else. And once you start something like this, you don't stop. And I don't like these ceasefires and these constant hesitations. Either do what you came there to do or get out. That's my opinion. But I am with you. I think in theory, helping the Iranian people overthrow this government would be a good thing. And I'm not sure that that came about as quickly as they thought it would. I think there's a miscalculation there.
I think they tried to be as honest with us as possible. I want to believe that, because I know they originally said 4 weeks. They said we'd be done in 4 weeks, and I have to believe that they were honest. I remember they said that. They said that it could very well be longer than 4 weeks. And I think they're trying to be as real with us about it as possible. But if you've ever I hate to say it, but I'm trying to imagine what it would be like if I were there myself. And I know in my head how chaotic that situation probably is and how difficult it is to just even get people in the right position around the Strait of Hormuz. Like, I can't even imagine how complicated that is, and having every little thing that happens be publicly blasted. I I don't fully understand what the end goal at this point is, unfortunately, which I
Yeah.
think is kind of where everybody's getting lost. And
Yeah.
I wish somebody would clarify that. I'm very much for seeing the people of Iran get their country back, but where is our involvement in that process, and what is the remaining objective for us at this
Yeah.
point? That's where I'm at.
I totally agree. And unfortunately, that remains to be found out. We don't know. I just hope it resolves itself in a way that, especially for the service people involved. Whatever we do with the safety of our service people involved as the priority. And that includes getting out properly, if that's what it comes down to. So a lot happening. I hope if you want to come back and discuss some of these things, all you have to do is let me know. Okay. She gave me the thumbs up for our audio audience.
I had a great time.
Okay. At Nicole _Nathern _Hedrick. And that is the screen name for the TikTok, which is rapidly growing. Every time I look at your account, you have another 1,000 followers. So you're growing rapidly. Have you gotten a lot of hate too? Have you gotten some of that?
No, I really haven't. I get the occasional kind of like they're kind of like off their rocker comment where it's just
Yeah.
profanity and whatnot. But I really haven't. I haven't gotten much at all, to be honest.
Well,
It's
that's good. I
mostly
hope
been very positive. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I hope you're probably due. Somebody like me, I've gotten a lot of it at different times, depending on what I'm talking about, but it comes with the territory. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today. Just a little reminder, I am Billy Dees, and you can probably find me most readily on X, which is the former Twitter, at Billy Dees. I got all my links are in there. You can check me out. I'm almost social media, but I'm going to say that X, because of the fact that it's so real time, it's so trending, and it's so tied in with news and current events, it's just a good fit for podcasting. What they call the new media, Substack people and all that are doing very well there. So yeah, please check me out. You can find the podcast anywhere podcasts are found. We're on all the major podcast platforms, over a 10-year history now. And very grateful for all the listens and the support that we have had. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves, and we will be talking to you again very, very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Billy D's podcast. Follow Billy D's on X @BillyD's for updates about the program.
Do you listen to music or audiobooks on streaming devices such as Sonos or Amazon speakers? How about on your car sound system? If you use Spotify, Audible, or Amazon Music on any of these systems, you can also listen to the Billy D's podcast the same way. Billy and his team go the extra mile to make sure our podcasts sound as good or better than anything on the radio. Listening to the Billy D's podcast has never been easier. You literally just have to ask.